I'm often asked, which weapons are the best weapons to use on my pawns? So I thought I'd put together a video that goes through most of the weapons in RimWorld and discusses the pros and the cons of each one. Before we get to the firearms, I need to explain a few terms that will be referenced throughout the video. First is the firing cycle. Firing cycle is made up of the aiming phase, the firing phase, and the cooldown phase. Aiming time occurs before firing. Firing is the time it takes to fire a full round, and then the cooldown phase is the time it takes before aiming time begins again. Aiming time can be reduced by the trait Trigger Happy, or the Shooting Specialist role from the Royalty DLC. If you combine both of these, you can achieve 1% aiming time, causing the pawns to enter the firing phase almost immediately. Trigger Happy also reduces accuracy by 5. This means the pawn's accuracy will be calculated at 5 levels of shooting skill below their current skill. Aiming time is also affected by the trait Careful Shooter, which adds 25% more aiming time while increasing accuracy by 5 skill levels. Cooldown, which again is the last part of the firing phase, can be reduced by the Heavy Bandolier, added from the Biotech DLC. Keep in mind though, the Bandolier fills the outer layer, meaning that it replaces the spot a Duster or Marine Armor fills, costing a fair bit of protection at the benefit of cooldown reduction. The second term that will be important is Stopping Power. Stopping Power measures whether or not a weapon will stagger an enemy. Stagger is a slowdown effect that occurs after a target is hit. Whether or not a weapon can stagger an enemy depends on the size relative to the stopping power. Anything human size or above requires at least 1 stopping power to stagger. This means any weapon with a stopping power of 0.5 will be unable to stagger a human. This is important because many of the weapons that we're going to list later have a stopping power of exactly 0.5. The third important term is Armor Penetration, also known as AP. This is a flat reduction to a target's armor. It's applied before the chance to damage is calculated. When the firearm is Masterwork or Legendary quality, the stat is increased. Take for example the Bolt Action Rifle. By default, the AP is 27% at normal quality, and increased to 40.5% at Legendary quality. The last term I want to mention before getting to the firearms is accuracy. It's important to distinguish between weapon accuracy and pawn accuracy. Weapon accuracy is determined by weapon type and quality. Pawn accuracy, on the other hand, is a fair bit more complicated and is affected by base weapon accuracy, shooting skill, range, weather, body size, presence of smoke, and cover. You can click on any pawn, friend or foe, and then hover your cursor over a possible target, and it will show you all of the factors that are affecting the final accuracy result. For this video, I've grouped the firearms into 4 categories: single shot, burst shot, full auto, and launchers. The first of our single shot firearms is the Autopistol. The Autopistol is the most basic firearm there is. I personally find that this one shouldn't be used as a long-term weapon. It does outshine the Revolver in terms of pure damage per second, or DPS, with 5.06 up to 3 tiles range, and 4.74 up to 12 tiles. But it does suffer from weaker armor penetration and stopping power. I suggest only using the Autopistol if it's being used to replace the short bow or one of the other tribal weapons. If you can, find a weapon to replace the Autopistol as soon as possible. Lastly, I wouldn't bother crafting these, but I do tend to use them in the early game if I pick them up off of an enemy. For the Revolver, the usage is going to determine whether it's a better or worse choice than the Autopistol. In terms of flat DPS, it is the weaker of the two, but it does allow for easier kiting in the early game with its superior stopping power. Generally, I tend to skip this one, unless there are no other options. I find it's better to choose the Autopistol, or better yet, move on as soon as possible to something with more DPS. Next up is the Bolt Action Rifle. The Bolt Action Rifle is a great early game weapon, and continues to be valuable throughout the game when used by pawns for hunting. A normal quality Bolt Action Rifle will have a DPS of 5.07 at a range of 13 to 25 tiles, but what it lacks in pure DPS, it makes up for in the utility of its other stats, particularly in its range and stopping power. In the early game, there won't be many enemies that can outrange the Bolt Action Rifle, and you can take advantage of this to deal damage without risking your pawns. Make sure you avoid using this one when the enemy closes the distance, as it quickly becomes weaker than even the Autopistol when used at very close range. The pump shotgun is another great early game weapon. Where it really shines is the high stopping power, making it a great weapon for kiting at short ranges. The pump shotgun also has superior DPS to all of the other options mentioned so far, with a respectable 7.28 when used at 3 to 12 tiles, making it one of the best single shot firearms. In terms of its downsides, it suffers from low armor penetration, making it significantly weaker against armored targets. I tend to pick the pump shotgun over the Autopistol or Revolver in most scenarios. The sniper rifle is the only firearm in the single shot category that I consider still viable once burst shot weapons become available. While the sniper rifle is generally used as a kiting weapon, on a shooter with high shooting skill, the sniper rifle can still perform reasonably well when used in a straight up fight. The DPS itself isn't the primary draw, rather it's the potential to deal lethal damage with any particular shot, given its massive base damage with 25 at normal quality and 37.5 at legendary quality. The sniper rifle is particularly well suited against mechs and sieges. It outranges everything except turrets, pikemen, and other sniper rifles. Try using this while kiting centipedes, or picking off termites before they can reach your walls. If you position your pawn correctly, you can fire at your target without risking return fire. You can even break sieges without taking a single point of damage. The charge lance is one of those firearms that is very difficult to find a use for in a colony. For any role that it might serve, there's another gun that does it better. It does have the highest base damage, as well as the highest armor penetration of any firearm. However, this is where the list of positives ends. It has underwhelming range, and the DPS is very disappointing. When used against an enemy like a centipede, it does perform admirably, but between the generally low DPS and the high cost of production, it's almost always better to go with something else. At the point where you can craft charge lances, you can also craft charge rifles, leaving little reason to craft a lance over a rifle. The Nerve Spiker is a weapon from the Anomaly DLC. It's a crossbow with an extra stun against biological targets. This one is useful at close range and reasonably effective at hunting. The Nerve Spiker is quite potent in the early game, but I find it falls off as you progress against more challenging and numerous targets. With only a few exceptions that were mentioned previously, burst shot weapons are the superior choice over single shot weapons. There are two reasons for this. Primarily, they're going to do more DPS as each bullet will deal damage independently of the others, and if one misses, the other two still have a chance to hit. On top of this, more bullets means higher chance to hit a critical hitbox like the brain, neck, heart, or liver. In the early game, the machine pistol is an underrated powerhouse. It deals moderate DPS at 9.92 for normal quality at up to 3 tile range, and 7.16 DPS at up to 12 tiles. The big downside is that the machine pistol is found lacking when it comes to armor penetration. On the other hand, another huge benefit of the machine pistol is having an incredibly low aiming time at only 0.5 seconds, and a low cooldown at 0.9 seconds. This makes the machine pistol fantastic for mobile combat. The machine pistol is highly lethal against unarmored targets, but weak against armored targets. Given that most of your enemies in the early game are unarmored, it's a great option before other guns become available. Since many pirates will show up in the early game with machine pistols, I never have to craft these. I always take and use any that I get off my enemies, at least until armor starts showing up. At that point, I switch to higher tier firearms as soon as I can. The assault rifle is one of the 3 core DPS firearms. When choosing a primary weapon for your colony, I'd recommend you choose between either this one or the heavy SMG. One of the things the assault rifle lacks is stopping power. It won't be able to stagger anything human size or above. For me, this isn't a deal breaker, as the assault rifle is putting out enough DPS to kill quickly enough that I don't worry about stagger. A normal quality assault rifle puts out 7.62 DPS at around 12 tile range, and 7.07 at around 25 tile range. Another thing to consider is that the assault rifle is not the best in class when it comes to armor penetration, with only 16% at normal quality. It has a slightly slower aiming time at 1 second and a cooldown at 1.7 seconds, making it slightly worse than the heavy SMG at mobile combat. The material cost of an assault rifle is relatively cheap at only 60 steel and 7 components. Once you have fabrication, you can pump out these really quickly, allowing you to get high quality weapons for every one of your pawns. All this being considered, the assault rifle is one of the best firearms to choose for your pawns. I'd only consider replacing the assault rifle with a charge rifle on high shooting skill pawns for superior DPS, or the heavy SMG on low shooting skill pawns in order to squeeze out more value from them. Keep in mind that if the assault rifle is a higher quality than the charge rifle, you won't get anything out of switching to the charge rifle. The chain shotgun is the second of the 3 core DPS firearms. It's really the champion of short range. It has fantastic DPS, but it suffers when it comes to armor penetration and range. But the truth is, it really shreds enemies at close range. It has the same stopping power as the pump shotgun, but fires 3 projectiles instead of just 1. In addition to all this, and most importantly, it's the highest single target DPS weapon in the game. A normal quality chain shotgun deals a substantial 11.99 DPS at around a 12 tile range. At 1.2 seconds, it has a longer warm-up time than the heavy SMG and the assault rifle, but oddly enough, at 1.35 seconds, it has a lower cooldown than both. As great as the chain shotgun is, I think the very short range makes it a firearm that's difficult to use for a lot of players, given how close a pawn has to be to the enemy. For this reason, I'd recommend the heavy SMG or the assault rifle over the chain shotgun. The heavy SMG is the third of the 3 core DPS firearms. It doesn't have as extreme of a range limit as the chain shotgun, but still operates at a much shorter range than the assault rifle. It's easy to acquire and can be used by any pawn at any shooting skill. It has great close range DPS. At normal quality, it deals 10.49 DPS at up to 3 tile range, and 8.02 DPS at up to 12 tile range. This does beat the assault rifle in terms of pure DPS, but suffers from that lack of range. It also has solid armor penetration at 18% for normal quality. That makes it higher than many of the other guns at a similar tech level. This is one of my favorite weapons in the game, and I really only begin to replace it by the end of the game with charge rifles on my higher shooting skill pawns. Similar to the assault rifle, the heavy SMG will be unable to stagger anything human size or above. At 0.9 seconds, the aiming time is superior to the assault rifle and chain shotgun. With 1.65 second cooldown, it outperforms the assault rifle in this regard. The low aiming time and moderate cooldown makes the heavy SMG one of the best choices in the game for mobile combat. The charge rifle is another one of my favorite firearms in the game. In terms of pure damage, the only thing that compares to it is the minigun. One massive downside is that it can be difficult to craft these in large quantities due to the resources required. It costs 50 plasteel and 2 advanced components per charge rifle. That means you won't be able to reliably equip high quality charge rifles on all of your pawns. This isn't a huge problem given that they generally underperform on pawns with low shooting skill. I'd recommend that you try to aim for at least a shooting skill of 13 before you start equipping your pawns with these. It has the same aiming time as the assault rifle at 1 second, but it underperforms when it comes to the cooldown at 2 seconds, making this less effective when considering mobile combat tactics. Similar to the minigun, this gun will perform better in static defenses. At normal quality, the charge rifle has a 8.47 DPS when fired at around 12 tiles, making it a fantastic option for single target DPS. It becomes less important to rely on mobile tactics when you're able to kill your enemy so quickly. The Hellcat Rifle is added through the Anomaly DLC. Essentially, the Hellcat Rifle is a slightly weaker version of the Assault Rifle with an attached flamethrower. It's particularly well suited for use against several of the Anomaly events, and it's also pretty useful against large biological raids, as long as you don't mind putting out fires. I don't find myself crafting these very often. I find the Incinerator performs much better as a flamethrower, and the Assault Rifle performs much better as a DPS firearm. The full auto category is made up of 2 firearms. These 2 are also known as crowd control firearms due to their powerful area attack. The first of the 2 is the LMG. The best feature of the LMG is the aforementioned area attack. Any bullet that misses the primary target still has a chance to hit any target nearby. This makes the LMG moderately useful against medium to large groups. Unfortunately, having other lackluster stats means that in almost all scenarios, there's an alternative firearm that will be a better choice. It has a long aiming time and cooldown, both at 1.8 seconds, and a mediocre armor penetration at only 16%. At 7.57 DPS at around 12 tiles, it has a difficult time competing with the other burst fire options. I generally skip the LMG and go right for the minigun if I'm looking for a crowd control firearm, but if I pick one up in the early game off of an enemy, I'll oftentimes use it anyway. The second of the full auto firearms is the minigun. The minigun has reasonably high DPS at normal quality. It deals 9.19 DPS between 12 tiles and 25 tiles. But this is not where the true value of the firearm resides. The most valuable part, just like the LMG, is the area attack. With 25 bullets per burst, this is significantly more potent than the LMG. This is particularly powerful when facing clustered enemies and has the potential to clear out crowds very quickly. It does come with a few downsides though. The minigun has a massive aiming time and cooldown at 2.5 seconds and 2.3 seconds respectively. I prefer to put these on a pawn with Trigger Happy or Shooting Specialist to make up for the large aiming time. The accuracy penalty from Trigger Happy really is a non-factor, given that the benefit of the minigun comes from the misses still having a chance to hit nearby enemies. This does become a bit of a double-edged sword, as you'll oftentimes find these misses damaging your walls. Truth be told, I frequently have to replace walls that were destroyed by my own miniguns. All in all, I'd recommend that you try to get at least 2 or 3 of these being used by pawns in your colony. One thing to remember, the minigun does cause a movement speed slow, so you may want to unequip them in between combat, and then re-equip them when combat starts again. For this video I decided not to address the specifics of launchers, as each one fits a specific role, and there's less of a question of which should I use given that they don't have a lot of crossover utility. But there is one specific use for the smoke launcher that I wanted to share with you. The smoke launcher has the ability to stop turrets from locking onto your pawns. Unlike with other weapons that just lose accuracy from smoke, the turrets are completely unable to fire. This occurs under 3 different conditions. When the turret is inside the smoke, when the pawn is inside the smoke, or when there's smoke in between the turret and the pawn. Be careful because the mechs at a cluster can still fire at you through the smoke, albeit with reduced accuracy. I prefer to clear the mechs out first. You can do this by destroying any structure in the cluster, then the mechs will begin to attack your base. Once you deal with the mechs, the rest of the cluster can be approached through smoke with no risk to your pawns. You can continue to destroy the cluster with guns, or better yet, bring frag grenades, as they suffer no accuracy penalty from the smoke. Continue to cover your pawns in smoke as you go, so the turrets remain inactive, and slowly level the cluster with your frag grenades. I hope this video helps you decide which firearms to use in your next playthrough. and I'd love to hear from you. Let me know in the comments which firearm is your favorite in the game. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this one. As a final note, I started a Patreon if you want to support me in creating weekly gaming videos. I posted a link in the description. I plan on taking some of your suggestions for my next few videos, so keep an eye out for those coming out very soon.